One of the most memorable evenings I had for a long time was when I was up at Lake Como in Italy on the Saturday night before the Italian Grand Prix one year, working for Grand Prix Tours, doing a talk with them. Phil Hill was on the boat on the lake, I remember. And after the talk, an Australian came up, not an unusual thing because there are a lot of international visitors and guests and fans coming to races with Grand Prix Tours in those days. Australian came up and said, "You don't know me. My name's Jim Smith, but I thought you might like to know that I was on Jim Clark's car at Indy in '65." I looked at him thinking, yeah, right. And of course, he was. We started chatting, got to know one another, became a very good friend. And he was on that car. He was an Aussie that went over to England with a marine engineering background, which I'm sure appealed to Colin Chapman and the engineering part of it anyway. Well, and the marine too, for sure. And started work in that factory in East London in Cheshunt in '63, '64. But in reality, Jim will tell the story, and he'll tell the story of being on Jim's car in '65. And then, as an additional bonus, we have a very short chat with Allan Moffat, who, would you believe, was also on Jim Clark's car at Indy in '65. Anyway, this is Jim Smith, top man. I recorded this chat with him just outside my hotel on the North Shore in Sydney, Australia.
With Colin Chapman, he looked after you. I never forget, we went to Milwaukee, and after the race, we had to get on a late flight out that afternoon. So Colin gets to the door of the plane and stands there and wouldn't let him shut the door till all of his team had turned up and got on board. It was an easy, there was no security. It was easy life. I can remember David Lasm, sorry Dave, standing there with his foot under the scales to make sure our baggage, which probably had half a car in it, was under the limit.
Tell me about about your relationship with Jim Clark when you first started to get to know him and how that progressed.
It was very interesting to get to, and especially looking back on it from the way back, but working with Jimmy was very interesting to be there in the middle of it all with Colin and seeing how Colin and Jimmy worked together. It was an interesting thing. And at Indianapolis in '65 when we were there, I worked with Jimmy, and well, a lot of it was with Colin, Jimmy and myself, and other, because David was looking after two cars, but he also helped and was with us at times. But Jimmy'd come in and say, we talked to the three of us, and Colin would say, right, this is what we'll do. And that's how it worked. Jimmy never asked for anything. He was, he was very good, very great to work with, but he never asked for it. Everything always came through Colin. It was a unique. I suppose I had a unique position to be there, looking after that car for the.
And how tough was it as a mechanic in that month of May in '65? What were your working hours, basically?
I can't remember very well. Look, there was odd times when it was pretty hard, full on. It was a beautiful car, but parts of the work on it was very difficult. It was changing an engine was an all-night job. It was shocking. It was hard to get out. It was very hard to get at it. And the original block that Ford sent over to England to set the chassis up with, the Len Terry, was a '64 engine, and the '65 engine had slight differences. So when we got a new engine from Ford Motor Company, we'd spend a couple of hours or more grinding bits and pieces off the engine mounts so they'd fit in the car. So,
you mentioned Len Terry. In Andrew Ferguson's book, he implies that Len Terry and Colin fell out in the month of May, and Colin actually sent him back to England before the race, I believe, which seemed a bit strange.
I don't think Len was ever there.
You didn't see much of him?
I didn't see him at all. I cannot remember seeing Len there. I know Colin, we sent Jimmy out late one afternoon with only a small amount of fuel in, and to run out of fuel. Then we took it up to SO, or ENCO as they called it in America at that stage, and filled it up. And when we filled it up, it was about 2 gallons, if I remember correctly, short of what the maximum allowable. And Colin had a few words to say, to put it mildly, because he realised with the fuel consumption we were getting, we could not do the race on 2 pit stops, is what he wanted to do. So that led to an argument with Ford Motor Company, which is an interesting story on its own.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Because Colin said to Ford Motor Company, he said, what can we do about, improve the fuel consumption? There's nothing you can do. He said, well, can I lean it out? And they said, no, Mr. Chapman. And he turned to me and he said, lean it out, Jim. So I leaned it out half a turn, I think, on the fuel injection, and sent Jimmy out, and Jimmy coasted back in the pits a couple of laps later, putting his thumb over his shoulder, pointing to the back, and we'd melted 8 pistons.
Oof.
We put the car back in the garage, and I spent the night pulling the engine out, and about 4 o'clock in the morning I heard a thump outside, and I opened the door and there was a box sitting there. A new engine with a different fuel injection system on it. I later found out that few of the other teams had tried that fuel injection system. They couldn't get it to work, but we used it. We didn't touch it. We used it, and it gave us the fuel consumption we needed.
There's a famous picture of you looking as if you're adjusting a front camber. Jimmy's got Goodyears on the car, obviously a practice run in the build-up to the Indy 500s, and that's something that's difficult to imagine today, switching from Goodyear to Firestone and back to and so forth.
Yes, well, it was. Well, after the calamity of '64, when the rear suspension collapsed on Jimmy's car, Jimmy would not have anything to do with Dunlops. There was, and so we weren't
at Indy. Obviously, he was racing with Formula One.
No, at Indy, and we weren't committed to a tyre choice at that stage. So we would run back-to-back tests for Goodyear and Firestones until a decision was made to stay with Firestones.
What made the decision?
Jimmy saw a chunk out of one of the Goodyears, and he said, take them off. He said, I will not use them again. But before that, there was one set of Goodyears would be on the car and a set of Firestones would be along the pit wall. We'd just change them and put them on.
Jim, what was your role in the... What did you specialise in? What role did you have in the team as such?
Well, that was interesting. I arrived at Indianapolis, and see, I was the new boy. And David said, right, with my background, I used to look after the engines and the gearboxes. And
which is marine engineering, basically.
Marine engineering, fitting and turning.
Yeah.
And I looked after the gearboxes and did any little bits and pieces we did to the engines. Mm-hmm. And when we arrived there, David said, right, Jim, you just look after the engines and gearbox and you give a hand on either car. And he said, and I said, okay. And 3 or 4 days later, Colin and Jimmy walked into the garage, and Colin just turned to me and said, right, Jim, you're looking after Jimmy's car. And Mike Underwood, he said, you look after Bobby John's, and he said to me, he said, you can still do the gearboxes and the engine? I said, yep. He said, right, that's how it's going to be. And that's how it was.
And do you think by then Jimmy had struck up a little bit of a relationship with you and had a certain confidence?
I had no problem with, we had no problem with each other.
Behind that,
he was, yeah.
And what was that like? Did you go for drinks with Jimmy in the evening? What was?
They had their day at the track. Then we started our work.
But he would come back to the track perhaps at night.
Sometimes I'd come back and say hello. Yes. No, we didn't socialise till the night after we won the race.
What was it like with the Woods brothers coming in?
Strange you might ask. I'd been looking, the fuel systems we had, the fuel connections we had on the car and on the hoses was a brand new set of English aircraft refueling rigs. And I took one look at them and tried to put them on, and unless you got them dead square, you couldn't latch to them. Mm-hmm. And I took one look and said, hey, we've got to do something about this. And I thought by filing a lead here and filing a lead there and fairing it on the nose of the connector, and I started doing it, and I did one, and then the Woods brothers turned up. We were introduced to them, and they said, right, and I said, you know, I showed them what I'd done, mm-hmm. And I said, yeah, and they were very interesting. They got a piece off the car and put it on the side of a packing box, and they got a hose and kept trying to, you know, connecting. Mm-hmm. And I said, look, you know, let me know if you got any problems. They said, oh yeah, a little bit tight here, a little bit tight there, and you know, and we just went through one of them until we got it so they could throw it, virtually throw the connector. We got them got one set how it was, right, how we wanted it. Yeah. Then I left them alone, and they did the other three. Another one for Jimmy's car, and the other one for the Bobby John's car. Right. And it proved it in the race that they just raced up the car, went bang. Yeah. And everyone was startled that we did our. They said, "Oh, they haven't got all the fuel in." And I think there was 26 seconds and 21 seconds for the two stops for Jimmy.
After the shunt in '64, that massive shunt, what was it like for you as a mechanic on the pit wall at the start of the race in '65, and indeed during the race? I mean, what did you do?
You'll be surprised at this one. The race was an anticlimax for me, because the Woods brothers were doing the fueling, so I did nothing for the 2.5 hours or whatever it is for the race. I just stood there, and that was it.
Wearing your
I'd done my, yeah, I was there, you know, we were there in case anything wrong with my car. No way, thank you.
What was the build-up to the race like? Can you remember being very nervous, and was Jimmy nervous?
Yes. No, I wasn't. I don't get too bad. And it was interesting. We had the car out in the middle of the track, you know, through all the ceremonies, and I was standing right behind it. And Colin walked up to me and said, "Jim, why is the roll bar on this side, the drop link on the outside, and on this side it's on the inside?" And I said, "Oops." Not that it made any difference, but it just looked different. And I said, "Oh yeah." And this is where.
So which one was correct?
Didn't matter. Didn't matter. Either one. So I just went and grabbed a couple of shifters, and Mr. Chapman hated shifters.
Yeah, I bet he did.
The first time I ever met Colin was in Germany at the Formula One race, and we were adjusting the steering on one of the Lotus 25s, and they had a Triumph Herald linkage on them, I think, and no one in their toolbox had two spanners that were fitted. So, but we carried a couple of extra larger shifters. So I'm walking down up towards the car with a shifter in each hand, and Colin looks at me and says, "Jim, there's only one thing wrong worse than a guy with a Mexican speed wrench in his hand, and that's a bloke with two."
You drove the Lotus 38. Not many people have.
Yes, I suppose I did.
Well,
yes.
That Lotus 38.
That Lotus 38, yes. It was after we flew it into New York. I hired a Hertz rent-a-car, a truck, and when I went in to hire the truck, they said, "Where's your driver's license?" So I handed them a driver's license. They said, "What's that?" And I said, "Oh, that's an international driver's license." He said, "Oh, you must be able to drive anything." I'd never driven a truck before in my life. So I took off up to New York, on Easter Friday actually, and I thought, "Oh, this will be great." And and the way across New York was through the garment district, and all the garment people, being Jewish, were all there. And it took me an hour to go a mile. So I loaded the 38-1 in the back, took it down to Trenton, New Jersey, unloaded it, went back and picked up another one and took it down there, took the other car there. So we did some testing at Trenton, New Jersey. Roger McCluskey hit the wall with the other car and it was stripped and sent back to England, but the other car was flown into Indianapolis. And we went out there with our pickup truck and a length of tow strap. So we tied the tow strap onto the front wishbone of 38-1 and I hopped in it. And we took off down the freeway.
Who was driving the...
Mike Underwood. And we took off down the freeway at 80 mile an hour and here's me with the foot on the brake saying, oh God, if you know, I could not have stopped it if he'd hit the brakes. I only thought years later, I thought, oh, how would have that changed history if I pranged that up for it. We arrived, you know, when we got the car into the garage, it only had a single yellow line down it. It was parallel all the way down. It didn't have a yellow nose on it. So Colin said to me, he said, hey, paint the nose yellow, Jim, so it'll stand out. So I had to tape it off and get a spray can of yellow paint.
You did that, did you?
Yes, I did that, and it's still there for years ago, for years. But the night after we won, the car went into impound, and we had a few drinks there. Then because being Indiana, alcohol-free day. See, those days the race was on Memorial Day.
Yeah. And
so we went to an Italian restaurant. Javi Kronbach was there as well. And I was sitting next to Jimmy, we had a good night. And they kept giving us cups of coffee, red coffee. In the end of it, I was so tired after working most of the night before. My head went on the table and I went to sleep because Jimmy dug me in the ribs. Hey,
was Jimmy the shy, retiring introvert that everybody says he was?
No, I didn't find. I found Jimmy very approachable, very good, and even after I left Lotus, Jimmy would come up and sit down and talk, and. He was interesting, One day he came up and sat down and he said, oh, look, he said, the press give me a bad name. He said, look, he said, if they come and ask me innate questions, he said, I clam up. He said, if they know what they're talking about and talk to me about race cars, he said, I'll talk to them all day.
You live here in Australia, Jim, but in the Tasman series that Jim Clark did, after that Indy, after you left Lotus, he used to come and look you up here in Australia?
Yeah, I just can't remember when we talked. We talked a few times because it was long after I'd left him. Because we had I never forget, we had a conversation one day and we were talking about the 66 Indy, where I was working for Parnelli Jones that year, and Jimmy finished second. There was that controversy over the laps that Jimmy lost when he spun it, and he said, well, he said, I spun it twice. He said the first time, he said the time I caught it, he said I was going backwards up the track at 150 mile an hour, and he said the engine was dead. He said, well, Clark, you can't start it. There's no reverse. You can't start it this way. So he said, I spun it again, and he said. Dropped it into gear, and he said the car was shuddering. It was all but stopped when the engine fired. So he was so close to being out of the race, actually, that it wasn't funny.
How did you get to leave Team Lotus in the end?
I couldn't see where Lotus were going, and so I said, righto, and I went back, and I was doing some work on the Lotus 30, and John Joyce got hold of me, and I did the clay on the nose of the Lotus 30 to make the Lotus 30 Mark II. And I did a couple of test days on the Lotus 30. I did a test day for the Cortinas, Ray was away somewhere, and then I said, George Bignotti was in England to see Eric Broadley, and we arranged to have lunch together. So I knew George from when I was in America with AJ Foyt, and so I went and we had dinner together, and George was cursing and swearing. I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "That bloody Broadley." I said, "What's Eric done?" He said, "I went there and said, I had all the drawings, all the measurements for the Lotus 34. And I wanted to show him." He said, "My name is Eric Broadley. I own Lola cars. If you want a Lotus, go and see Colin Chapman."
You did one Formula One race.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
That was my first race that I attended working, and it was at Solitude in Germany. We were having problems all weekend with the front suspension of the Lotus 25s or 33s, whichever we had. I'm 100% sure. The steering arms were falling out of the front uprights. It was looking back on it, very bad design and bad machining. Put the two together, and they were undercutting one part of the steering arm where it went into and they fell out. Yeah. And that day I actually drove a Lotus 25 as well as Lotus 30.
To the track.
Yes, from the pits to from the paddock to the track. Yeah.
Nice. But who was driving when? Who was you? What car were you on at Solitude?
I was on with Mike Spence, looking after Mike's car, and only lasted a few laps in the front. Front steering. The steering went on it, so he was out of the race.
So you had an early night.
Sort of.
Well, what happened?
I sat in the pits and had a few beers, and which didn't go down very well with Mr. Chapman. But I'll give Colin his due. After that, I was sitting in a bar with him in Trenton, New Jersey, and I had a beard of those days. And I was sitting there, I said, "I think I'll take my beard off." He said, "Oh, Jim, that'd be very good if you did." And but it did not interfere with his, our working association one little bit. No. He respected my ability, and it was good. He would say, "Hey, Jim, will you do this?" And I'd do it. And he'd go. He wouldn't, he'd never stand there and look over your shoulder. And I must say, David Lazenby was the same to work with.
Brilliant. Thanks. That's brilliant. Thank you so much.
And now here's Allan Moffat, the great Canadian, Australian racing driver, touring car driver par excellence, talking about his early years with Lotus Cortinas and working on Jimmy's car at Indy in '65. Apologies for the recording quality. It's not brilliant, I have to confess. This was done quite a while ago. Allan was on his mobile phone in Australia, not in a great area, and there wasn't much I could do, because if I didn't do the interview then, it was never going to happen. So bear with me. I've remastered it as much as I possibly can, and if you listen fairly intently, I think you get the gist of what he's saying.
The start of my golfer's career was a barbed wire fence at the back of the pitch, cyclone fence, I think is the phrase, where the mechanics would come up and just wash their hands, and I didn't have a pit pass, so I'm just hanging around on the back of this fence for the day. And ultimately, one bloke kept coming about, he came up about 3 times, so I was able to actually chat to him and ask him where the team was going for the next race, and they said, "Well, we don't know the name of the place, but all we know is it's in Iowa somewhere." Yeah. So I found out where that was and drove out to bloody Iowa, and walked up to the team manager, who happened to be Ray Parsons, and that was just a name to me. I didn't know who he was.
Yeah.
But he's an Aussie boy that had joined Team Lotus. And I said, well, could I help you wash the cars? And he just pointed to the buckets and said, off you go. And I never let on that I'd ever driven a car in my life. And for about 4 months, I was the go-fer.
Brilliant. What was the original circuit where you were behind the Hurricane fencing, Alan? Was that the Glen?
Watkins Glen.
The Glen.
Yes, that was the
right.
second race of the season
Yeah.
for the team. Ford of Americas actually obviously did a deal with Colin Chapman, and they had 3 Cortinas.
Yeah.
Sir John Whitmore, if you're standing at attention, you salute.
Yeah.
And a couple of other guys that they used in the car. So I really was just the water boy and whatever was needed to clean up from the day and keep the spare parts truck in tow.
Brilliant.
Ultimately, I drove that bus because that truck, the guys didn't know, one state from the other. And when I said, well, I can drive the truck to the next race, well, they were happier than hell because that meant they didn't have to try and do it. We'd be driving on the wrong side of the road type of thing.
So how did, and then I guess that led to the Indy 500, to being at Indianapolis, right?
Well, it did, but there was one stepping stone there. At the end of the season, I said to the Ford rep, where are we storing the cars for the winter? And he said, well, we're not storing them, we're selling them. And I don't know whether you've ever had a lightning moment in your career. I'm sure you've got to have many. Why am I saying that? You've had many lightning where you knew you had to get your tongue wrapped around the subject fast before somebody else did.
Yeah.
But on this occasion, I simply said, well, how much are you selling them for? And he said, $4,500. At which stage I instantly said, could I buy one? And he just looked at me as the gopher and said, Alan, what do you think you're going to do with the next Jimmy Clark Lotus Cortina that's in pristine condition? They'd never crashed any of the cars. And I said, well, Peter, I'm going to send the car, I'll tow the car down to New York City docks and send it to Australia, and I would be hoping to win the Australian Touring Car Championship in due course once it's landed in Australia. He said, well, that's very bloody commendable. And I said, well, thank you very much. And the only problem I had, Peter, was that my bank account was very, very flush with $1,500 in its account, not 45. And the hardest exercise of getting the whole car was, Dad, could you lend me $3,000?
Right.
And he says, you're just running around chasing fast women in the States and pretending you're a bloody race driver. And okay, I'll find the $3,000 for you. He would never give it to me personally. I had to go down to the office, and his secretary gave it to me, who was an older woman, and she was frowning very severely that I was obviously the spoiled brat, and here's A. Moffat Sr. Handing him $3,000 to go racing around the world. Little did they know what was in front of them.
Little did they know. Wonderful.
Yeah.
So,
but that was
yeah,
that was truly the start of my professional career. I have to admit that.
Yeah. Well,
my early days here were just with a TR3. That was nothing. That was kid stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I remember with vivid detail seeing that Lotus Cortina at Warwick Farm.
Yeah.
But underneath the cream on the side, I think it said Team Triton, did it not?
Oh, yeah, Tricon Racing Team. Yeah, that was a bit of a DS. Well, it wasn't DS, but my father was with Massey Ferguson. We were plagued around the world with him. And I spent 5 years in South Africa. And then came to Australia. And that was where I really started.
Yeah. So, Indy 65.
Indy 65 was the result of, after doing the 65 I don't know, Tasman Series races, and I was helping Jimmy's car along with Ray Parsons in those days. Again, just as a gopher, but nice to be part of the operation. And I got a phone call from the fellow that sold the car to me in Detroit originally. Peter Windsor was his name. Jeanette was his first spelled. And he said, he sent me a telegram. He said, if you're prepared to come back to Detroit and base yourself in Detroit and I've got 2 cars here that weren't sold, 2 other team cars haven't been sold, and they're yours for your use to practice as long as you participate in the Central Division of the Sports Car Club of America.
Wow.
Which I did, and ultimately won that Central Division championship. And then with the news that I'm going to Detroit, I thought, well, I know the Indy boys, so I dropped into Indianapolis on the way through.
Yeah.
And I was just at the circuit for 3 or 4 days, and again, just polishing the cars and picking up tools or something like that. And my top job on the day was I had a broom handle and a Dixie cup on the end of it, and I gave Jimmy his drink at the first pit stop.
And Allan, and you must have known Jimmy pretty well by then, obviously, from Lotus Cortina. Well, not at Lotus Cortina, but from the Tasman and then Indy.
Yeah, well, he gave me my first driver's suit, if you can believe that, in the days when we still, if you can believe it, Cam still allowed you just got in with blue jeans and a T-shirt. So that was kind of nice. And on another occasion where I had a chance to talk to Jimmy quietly, I was asked to go down to Rockingham with the Ford Brass from Detroit. Mm-hmm. And they had AC3 or some bloody thing that John Holman had organized. And I went down on that, and Jimmy was sitting on the curb, on the pit lane curb, and a wall, I should say, not curb.
Yeah.
And I walked over. Of course, I walked over and said hi and everything. And another one of those lightning moments came to me, and I was brave enough to say, Jimmy, tell me, when you're on the start line and you're ready to go, what goes through your mind? What changes you from being Jimmy Clark sitting here talking to me casually to getting on with the beating Graham Hill or whoever else was on your right-hand side? Mm-hmm. He said, well, Allan, I look over at my opposition first, eyeball them, just to let them know that I'm awake, checking whether they are awake. Yeah. And then I start saying to myself, I get madder than bloody hell at the world and everything around us, and then when I drop the bloody clutch, I go like hell. And I thought, this is Jimmy Clark talking like that to me. I couldn't believe what I was listening to.
Isn't
but
that
the bit about, I just get madder than hell, and when I drop the clutch, I go like hell too. But I can tell you, in '65, when Jimmy won the race, I was helping pouring the drinks that night in the hotel, which was the Holiday Inn across the street from the front door of the Speedway.
Right. Wow.
And everybody was not exactly thirsty, but no one was going dry. Let's put it that way. The drinks were flowing, and I was part of the delivery boy in the room for the drinks.
Brilliant.
Most of them were sitting on the ground, I might add. It was just an ordinary room. And in those days, anything that was so efficient where you only had to walk across the street to get to your racetrack compared to, driving at 400 miles or something to get to a racetrack that was in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. That was a pleasant evening, I can tell you that.
And Allan, do you have much recollection of the Wood brothers' involvement that race and that weekend and that night?
Yeah, yes, in as much that they were there only to do the pit stop, the tire changing, and the people at NASCAR were well trained in that from an early age, and those brothers were the only there, never touched the car, then wouldn't have known whether the engine was in the front or the back. They just knew where the 4 tires were, and they did the pit stop tire change.
Right. Very cool. Oh, thank you so much for that, Allan.
That's been a pleasure to talk to you today.
Absolutely, and to you, Allan. Take care, and we'll talk again very soon, I hope. Take care.
For now. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.